I paid $8, then the steak answered hollow near my feet.
Du tren kau truk vakak u kau trong tep da tai lin. Da Dan Markdown. 1. Turn complete. Part 1. Delivered. Approx 5,576 characters. Next. Awaiting your instruction to continue with Part 2. Continuity anchor. Last scene ended with Marcus walking toward the bus stop with the property address folded around Isaiah's apron pin. Part 1. The Exile and Hook. He was 24 and broke. No wages, no room, no supper waiting, just a dented copper mold, his mother's apron pin, and $8 he had saved from bus change. And with those $8, he bought a forgotten copper jelly mold room in Baltimore City, Maryland, a place that had fallen off trade maps in 1987. The rear roof had folded over the repair bench. Rain had split the chimney from crown to flashing. The city condemned it on October 14, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. Inside the hollow base of a planishing stake, unopened for 36 years, waited money, a ledger, and a truth about his mother's careful silence. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Marcus Hale had been straightening bent things his whole life without knowing it. As a boy in West Baltimore, he learned to make himself narrow in rooms where rent was late. He slept beside a knocking radiator and ate at a folding table propped on a church bulletin. When a pan rocked, Marcus found the high spot with his thumb. His mother, Lenora Hale, worked banquet kitchens and church suppers in a gray-seamed apron. She counted every onion and never discarded copper. On Sundays, she wore a brass pin shaped like crossed spoons. His mother's uncle, Isaiah Bell, taught Marcus why metal remembered. Every other Saturday, they rode to Isaiah's row house near Druid Hill Park, where the basement smelled of beeswax and hot tin. Isaiah repaired copper molds for hotels, funeral caterers, and church suppers. He tested each one on black granite, then raised dents from the outside inward with a polished planishing hammer. Marcus held the candle while Isaiah heated soldering irons, cleaned seams with sal ammoniac, and retinned interiors. At noon, they ate cheese sandwiches over the sink. Before leaving, Marcus polished one hammer face until the bulb shone in it without a scratch. Do not strike where the metal complains. Strike where it can answer. Isaiah meant that repair was not force. It was listening for the place where pressure could travel without making a new wound. Isaiah died in February 2014 after an illness Lenora called pneumonia. When they reached his basement, the landlord had emptied it. The granite slab, hammers, soldering coppers, recipe cards, and cedar pattern box were gone. Lenora stood on the last stair holding Isaiah's pin and asked no questions. 8 years later, Marcus worked under Vernon Pike at the Calvert Crown Catering Hall, beneath a ballroom where chandeliers trembled when trucks crossed the alley. Pike wore narrow cuffs and corrected timesheets with a silver pencil. He rationed butter, locked the walk-in, and watched through smoked glass. His control lived in shortened shifts, missing breaks, and the quiet replacement of anyone who questioned a figure. On October 3, 2022, the cooks found the ballroom doors chained, a white notice curled on the brass handle. Upstairs, Marcus found his blanket, shoes, and copper mold packed in a clear trash bag. Pike waited below with the silver pencil behind one ear. You were contractors. The company owes you nothing. Exactly 8 words. Marcus counted them because counting kept his hands still. Lenora had signed a contractor form months earlier. Her familiar hand confirmed that Marcus supplied his own tools and meals, though he had supplied neither. At the loading dock, she held her handbag against her chest. When he looked at her, she lowered her eyes to the wet concrete. The silence did the work. By evening, he had the bag, the mold, the pin wrapped in a napkin, and $63. He slept beneath the State Center canopy until a guard woke him. In Catonsville, he spent $12 on 2 sandwiches and a laundromat chair, then slept behind a garden center. A church van carried him to Ellicott City after shelter intake closed. He lay beneath Route 40 on cardboard and woke to river fog. The money thinned by exact degrees. $41 after medicine and bus fare, $26 after soup and coffee, $17 after adhesive for a peeling sole. Back in Baltimore, he slept upright at Penn Station with the mold inside his coat. On the 6th week, he had $9.14. He bought oatmeal for $1.14 and folded the remaining 8 behind Isaiah's pin. That afternoon, he entered the Enoch Pratt Free Library to warm his hands. A radiator clicked beneath the classified board. Most notices offered rooms he could not afford, labor requiring a truck, or furniture free to anyone able to move it. Near the lower corner, beneath a card for piano lessons, a city surplus notice had been pinned crooked. Sealed structure transfer. Former copper mold repair room. $8 administrative deed. Buyer assumes all liens, hazards, and demolition risk. The address was on a service lane east of Holland's Market. Inspection waived. Payment in cash. Filing closed at 3 the following day. Marcus read the card twice, then pressed his palm against the dented mold under his coat. $8 could buy 2 days of food if he was careful. It could also buy a door, even if the roof above that door was failing. He copied the address onto the paper napkin, wrapped the pin again, and walked toward the bus stop before the library clock reached 5. By noon the next day, Marcus would stand before a clerk who already knew the name Hale. K.U. Tara Loi, 2 turn complete. Part 2 delivered, approx 5,160 characters. Next, awaiting your instruction to continue with Part 3. Continuity anchor. Last scene ended with Marcus lying on the swept floor beneath the broken roof, while the hanging copper molds answered the night wind. Part 2, the arrival. The number 13 bus carried Marcus west before dawn, its windows filmed with breath and old rain. He rode as far as Frederick Avenue, then walked the remaining 4.5 miles because the transfer would have cost $1.90. His clear bag cut into 2 fingers. The copper mold, wrapped inside his coat, tapped his ribs with each step. That night, after taking the wrong road beyond Catonsville, he slept in the hayloft of an unused boarding barn while the temperature fell to 28 degrees. The hay smelled of mice and dry summer. He woke before the owner arrived, brushed the chaff from his trousers, and returned east beneath a sky the color of solder. Baltimore opened around him by degrees. A bakery on South Carey Street lifted its shutters. Wien's Market set bruised apples outside in green crates. The Holland's hardware sign swung above a narrow storefront. Across from it stood Doris's Cup and Saucer Cafe, a barbershop called Royal Line, and a funeral home whose black awning had been repaired with gray tape. Marcus passed all 5 without entering. He had no money left to spend, and no reason yet to be remembered. At 10 minutes before noon, he entered the land records office inside the old courthouse annex. The lobby smelled of floor wax and wet wool. A brass directory pointed him through a security arch and along a corridor where framed plats hung beneath cloudy glass. The clerk behind window 4 had iron gray hair twisted around a yellow pencil. Her nameplate read, Mrs. Evelyn Crow. She examined the surplus notice, then examined Marcus with equal care. You understand the structure is condemned? Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no water service? Yes, ma'am. You understand the rear roof may collapse? Yes, ma'am. You understand the city may still demolish it? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Crow removed her glasses. One lens bore a small crescent scratch that caught the ceiling light. "And you have $8. Marcus placed the bills beneath the glass. They were softened from being folded around the apron pin. Mrs. Crow straightened each one against the counter, aligning Washington's face with the edge of a blotter. The deed was 3 pages long. Marcus signed where she pointed, first in blue ink and then again beneath a paragraph, assigning him every unpaid lien, structural hazard, and legal consequence attached to the parcel. Mrs. Crow carried the papers to a brass recording stamp mounted on an oak block. The handle descended with a deliberate clack. Red numerals appeared beside his name. She gave him directions slowly. West on Baltimore Street, south at Cary, past Holland's Market, then left into an unnamed service lane behind the former bakery warehouse. The copper room stood beyond a chained lot, beside 2 black walnut trees and a drainage channel that reached Gwynn's Falls after heavy rain. Marcus folded the deed once. Mrs. Crow did not release her side of it. "Hale," she said. "Were you kin to Isaiah Bell?" The room seemed to narrow around the sound of that name. "He was my mother's uncle." "I thought so." Her hand remained on the deed. "He came here in 1987, when the repair room closed. Asked whether an apprentice could inherit a commercial lease without the owner's family signing." Marcus felt the mold against his ribs. "What apprentice?" Mrs. Crow looked toward the line forming behind him, then lowered her voice. "A young woman named Lenora Hale." For several seconds, Marcus heard only the fluorescent hum above window 4. "My mother never worked there." Mrs. Crow's expression did not change. "I did not say she worked there. I said Mr. Bell asked whether she could inherit it." She opened a shallow drawer and searched among rubber bands, binder clips, and expired parking permits. From the back, she removed a photocopied index card. Its typing faded to gray. "Bell, Isaiah, application withdrawn, Osito 2, 1987. On the lower line, written in blue pencil, were 2 words, L. Hale. Why was it withdrawn? No family consent. No payment of back taxes. The city sealed the premises that same week. Mrs. Crow slid the card beneath the glass. Your uncle returned twice. Your mother came once. She stood where you were standing and said nothing for nearly an hour. Marcus pictured Lenora at the loading dock, her eyes lowered to wet concrete. Mrs. Crow released the deed. Take Cary Street, she said. It is shorter. Outside, the wind had strengthened. Marcus walked south with the paper inside his shirt. At Holland Street, a man named Mr. Ames was sweeping glass from the pavement before a boarded upholstery shop. He wore one red glove and one brown. You looking for the copper place? He asked. Marcus stopped. Mr. Ames nodded toward the service lane. Only strangers carry bags that carefully. A brindled dog watched from beneath his broom cart. It rose, circled Marcus once, then returned to the shelter of the wheels. Mr. Ames told him to follow the broken brick wall until the walnut trees came into view. The lane was narrower than Mrs. Crow had described. Rainwater occupied its center, reflecting warehouse windows and a torn strip of sky. The 2 walnut trees stood behind a leaning wire fence, their black branches crossing above the roof like unjoined rafters. The building was 38 feet long and perhaps 16 wide, built of warm red brick patched with sheets of weathered tin. The front wall remained square, but the rear half had settled toward the drainage channel. A slate roof covered the first 2/3. Beyond that, rafters showed through a collapse darkened by rain. The chimney rose from the east wall, split vertically and held by a rusted iron strap. Above the double doors hung an oval copper sign, green at its edges. Most of its lettering had vanished. Marcus could still read the final words. Molds, repaired. The chain on the doors had been cut by the city, and looped back loosely. Marcus lifted it free. The right door opened 3 inches before swollen wood caught against the floor. He leaned his shoulder into it. Something brittle gave way inside, and the gap widened with a sigh of dust. Cold metal and damp plaster met him first. Beneath those smells lay beeswax, scorched flux, and the faint mineral sharpness of old copper. His boots grated over fallen glass. When he touched the wall, brick dust warmed against his palm despite the cold room. The front chamber held a scarred counter, 3 shelves, and dozens of dented molds hanging from square nails. Some were shaped like fish, pears, wheat sheaves, and cathedral domes. Rain tapped through the roof into a galvanized basin. Each drop carried a different note. Marcus moved toward the back room. The floor dipped under his left foot, then steadied. A planishing stake stood beside a repair bench, its polished head black with age. Near it lay soldering irons, wooden mallets, and recipe cards curled into tight brown cylinders. When Marcus lifted one, the paper tasted faintly of dust where it touched his cracked lip. The rear collapse had buried half the workbench beneath slate and plaster. Through the opening above, he could see bare walnut branches moving against the afternoon light. Wind entered there and passed through the hanging molds. They answered one another softly. Before dark, Marcus swept a rectangle of floor with a bundle of twigs. He set the copper mold near his head, wrapped the apron pin in the deed, and placed both beneath his folded coat. His supper was water from the public fountain at Holland's Market, and the heel of bread Mr. Ames had left on the wire fence without explanation. He lay facing the repair bench. The building shifted as the temperature fell. One joist clicked beneath him. The chimney gave a low internal scrape. Somewhere behind the wall, water traveled through a pipe no longer connected to anything. Marcus did not sleep for a long while. Yet when he closed his eyes, there was a locked door behind him, and a roof, however broken, above his face. Some things are not abandoned. They are waiting for careful hands. Cow Tra LOI 3 turn complete. Part 3 delivered. Approx 6,160 characters. Next, awaiting your instruction to continue with Part 4. Continuity anchor. Last scene ended with Marcus sitting beside the drainage channel at dusk while the unopened letter waited inside the copper room. Part 3. The discovery. For the first 3 days, Marcus learned the building by necessity. The capped well stood behind the eastern wall, beneath a rusted hand pump. He removed the cover, lowered a weighted jar, and found water 6 feet below, clear enough to wash with. But smelling faintly of iron, the outhouse leaned toward the drainage channel, its door secured by a spoon bent into a latch. Inside the repair room, he memorized every floorboard that complained. The third plank beside the counter squealed sharply. The boards near the chimney answered with a lower groan. One narrow strip before the back bench made no sound at all. On the 4th morning, he entered Holland's Hardware. The shop was long and dim, with drawers rising to the pressed tin ceiling and seed packets turning slowly above an iron stove. Its owner, Walter Finch, had lost the tip of his left index finger. He used the shortened finger to follow every figure in a red account book. Marcus placed the recorded deed on the counter. I need chimney brushes, lime, and something to cook in. Walter looked from the deed to Marcus's shoes. You own the copper room, according to the city. You have money? No, sir. Walter opened the red book. Then you have an account. Pay when the roof stops leaking. Marcus did not move. Walter pushed a narrow paperback across the counter. Home repairs for owners of old masonry buildings had been printed in 1966. Its cover was stained with coffee. That one is free, he said. The mistakes are already paid for. Marcus bought only what could not wait. A 6-inch wire chimney brush for $7.40, 20 feet of jointed fiberglass rod for $5.25, a canvas dust sheet for $2.10, stove cement for $3.65, and a dented enamel saucepan for $1.80. Walter entered each amount beneath Marcus's name without asking for a signature. Back at the repair room, Marcus tied a stone to a cord and lowered it from the chimney crown. The line stopped 7 feet above the hearth. He climbed through the rear roof opening, straddled 2 sound rafters, and worked the brush downward in quarter turns. Dry soot came first. Beneath it, the brush struck creosote hardened into black scales. He wrapped the chimney opening below with the canvas sheet, leaving one corner loose for the rod. Then he pushed, twisted, withdrew, and struck the flue walls with the brush until his shoulders cramped. Twice the rods jammed. The second time he had to climb down, rotate the assembly from below, and return to the roof. After 4 hours, the blockage broke. A slab of creosote fell into the hearth with the weight of fired clay. Marcus continued until the brush traveled from crown to smoke shelf without resistance. He scraped the shelf with a flat soldering paddle, vacuumed the soot with a borrowed hand bellows, and packed the worst crack near the flue collar with stove cement. By the time he finished, 8 hours had passed and his face was striped black, except where sweat had cleared 2 lines beside his nose. Walter had also left him 3 pieces of split oak and a paper sack containing 2 potatoes, 1 onion, and salt. Marcus built a small test fire over twisted classified pages. The first flame wavered, then leaned steadily toward the throat. Smoke climbed cleanly instead of spilling into the room. He held his palm beneath the mantle. The draw remained strong. That evening, he boiled the potatoes and onion in the enamel pan. The food tasted of smoke, salt, and a trace of rust from the chipped rim. It was the first hot meal he had eaten beneath his own roof, and he consumed it slowly enough for the second potato to remain warm. The next morning, daylight from the broken roof reached deeper into the workroom. Marcus began an inventory, not for value, but to understand what the room had once required. 7 copper molds hung along the north wall, their interiors gray where old tin had survived. A mushroom-headed planishing hammer lay in a leather loop beneath the bench. Beside it rested 2 soldering coppers, one broad and one pointed, with iron heads blackened by charcoal. He found a cake of sal ammoniac wrapped in wax paper, a jar of powdered pumice, and a wooden stake shaped for the curved shoulder of melon molds. Under the lowest shelf stood a square granite checking stone, its surface smooth enough to reflect the window light. A ledger press occupied the corner, and beneath it sat a box of recipe cards, listing quantities for suppers of 60, 90, and 140 people. Marcus placed each object on clean newspaper. The planishing stake remained fixed to the floor near the bench. Its head was forged steel, polished by years of turning molds against it. The shaft entered a heavy cylindrical base made to resemble cast iron. Yet when Marcus struck the base lightly with the wooden mallet, the upper half rang solid, while the lower half returned a hollow note. He struck it again. Solid. Hollow. He knelt and measured the circumference with a strip torn from the classified notice. The base was wider than required for the shaft. He tried to shift it and felt weight move inside half a second after the iron stopped. Marcus sat back on his heels. At the rear of the base, beneath a ridge of dirt, his thumbnail found a narrow seam. He cleaned it with the point of the soldering copper. The seam formed a circle 7 inches across. No hinge was visible, but 2 shallow notches faced one another along the edge. He inserted the tips of a pair of dividers and turned. Nothing moved. He warmed the seam with a cloth soaked in hot water, then worked beeswax around it. After 20 minutes, he tried again. The circular plate shifted less than 1/8 of an inch. A smell of cedar escaped through the opening. Marcus continued in small movements, never forcing the metal, turn, rest, lift, turn, rest, lift. At last the plate came free. Behind it rested a cedar disc fitted tightly into the hollow base. Its center had darkened where fingers had once pressed it. Marcus tested the disc with the mallet. The sound was dull, and the weight behind it remained uneven. He bored 2 small holes near the edge with a bradawl, threaded copper wire through them, and pulled. The disc resisted until a strip of old felt released from the iron wall. A parcel wrapped in oilcloth slid forward. Marcus carried it to the granite stone. He closed the outer door, though no one had passed the lane all morning. Then he washed his hands at the pump and dried them on the inside of his shirt. The first layer of oilcloth enclosed 3 packages tied with waxed linen. He opened the narrowest one first. Inside lay 6 planishing hammers, their faces polished and wrapped separately in wool. One handle bore the initials IB burned near the eye. Isaiah Bell. Marcus held the hammer without lifting it from the cloth. The second package contained raw sheet copper rolled around a cedar dowel, 4 bars of tin, a small silver solder coil, and a packet of powdered sal ammoniac marked "Keep Dry." Each material had been labeled in Isaiah's square hand. The third package was heavier. Beneath the folded canvas apron sat a blue steel cash box, a recipe ledger, and 1 sealed envelope. Marcus moved the letter aside. The cash box opened with a key taped beneath its base. Inside, currency lay in paper bands, accompanied by cloth rolls of coins. He carried everything to the front counter and counted once, then again. There were $50 bills, 20s, 10s, and several worn 5s. The coin rolls held silver Washington quarters, Mercury dimes, Buffalo nickels, and 8 Morgan dollars, blackened at the rims. Beneath them rested a purple heart in a cracked presentation case. The reverse was engraved Elias M. Bell, 1944. Marcus counted the paper money in groups of 500. He stacked the silver separately and entered each amount on the blank back page of the repair manual. The total came to $28,610. Not $28,600, $28,610. He recounted the final band and found no error. The recipe ledger was bound in brown cloth, swollen slightly by damp. Its first page listed repairs by kitchen, church, and year. Besides several entries Isaiah had written, "No charge, holiday meals." Other lines named households, quantities of gelatin, and the number of portions served when cupboards were empty. The envelope beneath the ledger carried no name. Only 4 words appeared on its face: "For the one who stays." Marcus did not open it. He returned the money, metal, tools, copper, and ledger to the oilcloth, but he kept the envelope beside him. At dusk he walked beyond the walnut trees to the drainage channel. Rain from the previous week had raised the water until it moved steadily over brick fragments and bottle glass, carrying thin bands of reflected sky toward Gwynn's Falls. He sat on the cold bank until the first warehouse lights came on. Behind him, the copper room held more money than he had ever touched, the tools he believed lost, and a letter whose handwriting he already recognized. Some things are not abandoned. They are waiting for careful hands. The Kadu Tra LOI Turn Complete, Part 4, delivered approx 580 characters. Next, awaiting your instruction to continue with Part 5A to 5D. Continuity anchor. Last scene ended with Marcus asleep beside Isaiah's ordered hammers, while the old soldering copper cooled on the granite stone. Part 4. The Letter. At first light, Marcus carried the envelope to the front counter and set it beside Isaiah's hammer. The handwriting was not merely familiar. He knew the way the capital F leaned forward, the narrow loop in the word one, and the heavy period Isaiah made by holding his pencil still. Marcus had seen those marks on labels beneath the basement bench, on sandwich bags, and once on a birthday card containing 5 clean dollar bills. He broke the seal with a soldering paddle. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then you stayed long enough to hear the stake answered differently near its foot. That is a good beginning. A person who listens before striking may be trusted with what is here. My name is Isaiah Nathaniel Bell. In March 1986, Dr. Helen Markham at Mercy Hospital in Baltimore told me that I had pancreatic cancer and perhaps 1 year of useful work remaining. She spoke honestly, which was a kindness. I have used more of that year than she expected. This room began with Samuel Bell, born enslaved near Cambridge, Maryland in 1844. After emancipation, he learned tinsmithing in Baltimore and opened a repair bench on this lane in 1872. His daughter Ruth Bell, born in 1868, raised copper molds here until 1911. Ruth taught her son Nathaniel, born in 1892, who returned from France after the Great War with 1 damaged lung and steadier hands than before. Nathaniel taught my father, Elias Matthew Bell, born in 1918, and my father taught me. Elias was killed in Belgium during the Second World War in December 1944. The Purple Heart beneath this letter is his. The trade closed on October 2, 1987 by then. Hotel kitchens bought thin factory molds and discarded them when they bent. Church women still brought us the old ones because those molds had names attached to them. For more than 30 years, this room has kept its silence, though silence does not mean uselessness. The money came from repairs, not treasure. Some belonged to families who paid $2 at a time. Some came from hotels that paid late. Much of it was set aside after the free Christmas and Easter suppers, when we charged no labor and purchased the gelatin ourselves. If you work the copper, anneal it only to a dull red, near 900 degrees, then quench it cleanly. Use 1 part sal ammoniac to 4 parts water for stubborn oxide. When tinning, warm the mold until the tin moves like cream but never smokes. Planish from the outer edge of a dent toward its center, and test the base on the black stone after every 12 strokes. A mold that wobbles will betray the cook when it is full. Tools are inherited by using them. Money is inherited by deciding what work it must protect. Keep enough to make the building sound. Keep enough to begin honestly. Do not spend the rest merely because loneliness has taught you to fear an empty hand. I once hoped my apprentice would take this room. She was young, exact, and better with seams than I was at her age. Circumstances closed around her, and I did not know how to open them. Perhaps she will come. Perhaps her child will. Perhaps you have no blood connection to us at all. That does not change the work. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Isaiah Nathaniel Bell. September 18, 1987, Marcus read the letter twice. The second time, he slowed over the sentence about Isaiah's apprentice. He did not need Lenora's name written there. He could see her hands cleaning copper beneath the yellow basement light. Hands that had later signed Vernon Pike's form and folded themselves around a handbag, rather than reach for her son. He returned the pages to their original creases. Isaiah had folded the lower third first, then the upper, leaving a narrow ridge beside his signature. Marcus followed those lines exactly and placed the letter inside the recipe ledger. Beyond the back door, the morning had sharpened. Frost covered the drainage bank, and each walnut husk looked sealed in white wax. The letter mentioned the black stone. Marcus had already found the granite checking slab beneath the press, but when he turned it over, he discovered a shallow arrow cut into one edge. The arrow pointed toward the eastern wall. He moved a stack of broken mold frames and found a small brass marker set between 2 bricks. It bore Samuel Bell's craft mark. A shallow bowl crossed by a planishing hammer. Beneath it, nearly erased by mortar dust, someone had scratched 4 words. Begin at the true base. Marcus touched the mark, then looked toward the hollow stake. Isaiah had left more than one way of finding the secret. One depended upon sound. The other depended upon knowing where the first craftsman had placed his name. Back inside, Marcus opened the oilcloth parcel and selected the broad soldering copper that had belonged to Isaiah. Its wooden handle was cracked but firm. He built a charcoal bed in the repaired hearth and rested the iron head near the coals. When it had taken enough heat, he tested it against a shaving of tin. The tin softened and traveled across the dark face in one bright line. Marcus held the tool beneath the window light. For the first time since Isaiah's death, one of the old irons was ready to work. He began to understand that his arrival had not been made possible by $8 alone. Mrs. Crow had kept a forgotten index card instead of discarding it. Mr. Ames had left bread on a fence and asked for no explanation. Walter Finch had opened a credit book beneath the name of a man whose shoes showed every mile. Even the hay barn owner, by not entering before dawn, had given Marcus one unchallenged night. None of them had rescued him. Each had merely moved one obstacle far enough for him to take the next step himself. Before we go further, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they could not have known how badly you needed it. A meal, a ride, a patient answer, a door left open. Tell us in the comments what it was, and if you remember their name, let that name be spoken again. That night Marcus laid Isaiah's hammers beside the wall in order of size. He placed the Purple Heart in its case near his coat, then slipped the folded letter beneath the apron pin. He slept with the heirlooms beside him and the warm, soldering copper cooling on the stone. Cayutra LOI 5 turn complete. Part 5A5D delivered, approx 5 to 930 characters. Next, awaiting your instruction to continue with Part 5E5H plus Part 6. Continuity anchor. Last scene ended with Marcus lowering the restored north sash, while a chickadee waited on the walnut branch beyond the preserved 1788 pane. Part 5. The Slow Rebuild, Section 5A, December, the roof. The first snow came on December 3rd, measuring 4.5 inches against the eastern wall. Marcus read the roofing chapter in Walter's repair manual 3 times before climbing higher than the front eave. The sound half of the roof measured 38 feet by 11 feet on each slope. Allowing for overlap and waste, he calculated 12 squares of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 28 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Walter studied the figures, then reached beneath his counter and brought out a roofing hatchet with a narrow leather grip. My brother used this until his hands failed. Marcus turned the tool over. One cheek bore a notch for pulling nails. The blade had been sharpened so often its curve was almost gone. I'll return it. Walter shortened one finger across the account book. Return it by using it. The skilled help arrived the next morning without being asked. Abraham Cole was 71, a former roofer with white eyebrows and a permanent bend in his right knee. He examined the collapsed section from the lane, refused Marcus's offered coins, and climbed the ladder before breakfast. They worked for 11 days. First, they raised the broken rafters with a bottle jack and sistered each one using straight pine, through bolted above the sound wall plate. Abraham snapped a chalk line from ridge to eave, blue dust marking where the new courses had to remain honest. He taught Marcus to seat each nail with 3 strokes: set, drive, finish. On the second afternoon, Abraham tapped a shingle with 1 knuckle. That nail's proud. Marcus lifted the hatchet. Pull it. They said little beyond what the work required. Felt went down beneath cold hands. Shingles overlapped in staggered courses, their joints never aligned. Marcus learned to leave a narrow breathing space where each cedar edge would swell after rain. On December 14th, they fixed the final ridge cap. Abraham descended first and stood in the lane while Marcus poured a bucket of water across the new slope. Nothing reached the room below. By mid-December, the repair bench remained dry through an entire night of rain. Section 5B, January. The chimney. January exposed what soot had hidden. Several chimney bricks had spalled so deeply that Marcus could crush their faces between two fingers. Mortar, beneath the crown, had turned to powder, and the eastern joint opened visibly whenever the wind pressed against the stack. He dismantled the upper 6 courses one brick at a time, numbering the sound pieces in chalk. Walter supplied hydraulic lime, washed sand, and fire clay. For the outer joints, Marcus mixed 1 part lime to 2.5 parts sand. Around the flue, he used 1 part fire clay to 3 parts sand, adding only enough water for the mortar to hold on an inverted trowel. The work occupied 3 weeks in temperatures that rarely rose above 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Marcus warmed bricks beside the hearth before setting them. Every 15 minutes, his bare hands went numb, and he climbed down to hold them over a pan of heated stones. Gloves protected the skin, but dulled his control, so he removed them whenever he buttered a joint or pressed mortar beneath the flue tile. He replaced the worst spalled units with salvaged Baltimore brick from Walter's yard. Each was soaked briefly, then drained so it would not steal water from the lime. The crown received a slight outward slope, and Marcus cut a drip edge beneath it with the corner of his trowel. On January 27th, he lit the test fire. For several minutes, he watched the smoke through a mirror angled above the hearth. It rose without hesitation. Outside, Abraham stood beneath the walnut trees and watched a clean gray ribbon leave the chimney crown. No smoke entered the room. Section 5C, late January. The floors. Beneath the soot, the floorboards were white pine, fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails. Marcus drove each loose nail below the surface with a square punch, then rented a random orbit sander from Walter for $14 a day. He began with 80 grit paper, moving with the grain and stopping whenever the machine's pitch changed over a soft board. The second pass used 120 grit. The final pass used 220, light enough to remove the raised fibers without erasing the shallow marks left by earlier workers. Dust traveled everywhere. It settled inside the molds and coated Marcus's eyebrows. He sealed the workroom with canvas, swept twice, and wiped the planks with a cloth dampened in mineral spirits. The first oil coat disappeared almost immediately into the dry pine. He applied the second after 24 hours, and the third 2 days later, rubbing each one thin with folded linen. The floor cured for 48 hours, with the doors cracked and the stove kept low. What had appeared dark honey beneath the dirt shifted toward mahogany, especially near the repair bench where decades of shoes had compressed the grain. The rose-head nails remained visible as small black constellations. One morning, Marcus rose before light and found he could not lift the sanding pad. He walked to the drainage channel instead. A great blue heron stood in the marsh shallows, motionless except for the wind moving its breast feathers. Marcus watched until it struck once into the water and lifted a silver fish. He did no work that day. By evening, he had stopped measuring the hours he believed he had wasted. Section 5D, February. The windows. 8 windows remained in the building. 3 had no glass at all. 4 were cracked across 1 or more panes. The final window on the north wall beside the granite stone held a single wavy pane marked in the corner with the date 1788. Marcus preserved it exactly where it was. He removed each damaged sash and laid it flat across padded trestles. Old putty came away under controlled heat and a narrow chisel. Where the glazing points had rusted through, he replaced them without driving them hard enough to bruise the glass. Marcus kneaded DAP 33 glazing putty until it warmed in his palm. He rolled it into narrow ropes, pressed each rope into the rabbet, set the pane, then tooled the outer bevel in one continuous stroke so rain would shed beyond the wood below. The sash cords had rotted inside the weight pockets. He replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over the pulley and securing it to the counterweight with a figure-8 knot. The repaired sashes rose without jerking and remained wherever he released them. He saved the north window for last. The 1788 pane distorted the lane, bending the walnut trunks toward one another. Marcus cleaned only its interior surface, leaving a faint cloud of age around the edges. As he tied the final cord, a chickadee landed on the nearest walnut branch. It turned its black-capped head toward the open frame, gave one clear call, and remained there while Marcus lowered the sash into place. KU TRA LOI 6, script complete. Total approximately 39,900 characters. Part 5. The Slow Rebuild. Section 5E. Late February. The plaster. The walls near the chimney had been covered with horsehair plaster pressed over hand-split oak lath. Marcus's first patch dried too quickly and cracked from corner to corner. The second sagged before noon. The third pulled away with a hollow sound when he tapped it. Walter brought an old feed bag from his storeroom. Inside was clean horsehair left from his father's repairs. Marcus mixed lime putty with sharp sand and worked the hair through it by hand until every strand separated. The scratch coat went on first, pressed firmly between the lath, and scored with horizontal lines. Over it, he laid a 3/8-inch brown coat, leveled with a straight wooden rule, then left it untouched for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The finished coat measured 1/8 of an inch. He floated it slowly, allowing the old wall's unevenness to remain visible rather than forcing it flat. When the last patch held through a full stove fire, Marcus rested his palm against the pale surface. These patches will hold another 100 years. Section 5F. Doris, Caleb, Reverend Boyd. Doris from the cafe began leaving paper bags on the doorstep before sunrise. She wore red spectacles on a chain and folded every bag twice at the top. Inside, Marcus found egg sandwiches, slices of apple cake, or soup sealed in glass jars. When he carried the empty jars back, she pushed his coins away. Pay me in candles when the shop reopens. Caleb Ames arrived one Saturday on a green Schwinn bicycle, steering with one hand and balancing a splitting maul across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow as a fence rail, with a pale scar beneath his lower lip. He split 2 weeks of oak behind the eastern wall, stacking each piece bark side up. When Marcus offered payment, Caleb shook his head and studied the ground. My mother said, "About your grandfather." Marcus did not correct him. In a room shaped by 4 generations, the exact branch of kinship mattered less than the fact that someone remembered. Reverend Boyd passed the lane each morning in a long brown coat. A silver hearing aid curved behind one ear. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat, looked once at the repaired roof or the new chimney crown, and offered the same 4-word prayer. Keep these hands steady. Then he continued toward the church. Section 5G. Cellar and Easter egg. Marcus postponed the cellar until February 11th. The trapdoor lay beneath the front counter, swollen shut and edged with mouse nests. After lifting it with a pry bar, he descended 7 granite steps into a chamber 12 feet wide and 15 feet long. Its fieldstone floor had been laid without mortar. Each stone fitted tightly enough that only fine gray dust filled the joints. At the center rested a dressed granite slab. Samuel Bell's craft mark, the shallow bowl crossed by a hammer, had been carved into its surface. Marcus cleaned the mark with a dry brush. He did not lift the slab. Under the third stair, however, his fingers touched a small oak box wedged behind a loose stone. The lid had no hinge, only 2 wooden pins. Inside lay a brass key, whose bow had been shaped like a copper mold, deep and fluted around the edge. Beneath it was a tintype from 1903. A young woman stood outside the same building before the lane had been paved. She wore a dark skirt, rolled sleeves, and a leather apron. One hand held a planishing hammer against her hip. Her face resembled Marcus's, closely enough that he lowered the photograph and looked toward the cellar window. On the back, scratched into the metal, were the words Ruth Bell, daughter of Samuel Bell, age 25, summer of 1903. Marcus carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel. He did not know what it opened. Section 5H, March and April, spring. By March, the snow retreated into narrow gray banks beneath the warehouse walls. The drainage channel became a loud creak after every storm. Walnut catkins hung above the lane like green-brown cords. Marcus had once imagined that repairing the building would entitle him to begin the old craft immediately. Instead, the sound roof and clean chimney made him more careful. He decided not to undertake a full mold that spring. He spent one worn Morgan dollar on small copper sheets, tin, charcoal, and flux. On scraps no larger than his palm, he practiced annealing, raising shallow curves, smoothing seams, and counting 12 hammer strokes before checking each piece on the granite stone. Some samples split, others rocked, one held steady. The house was patient. So was he. Part 6, the epilogue. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Marcus completed his first full copper jelly mold. He began with a flat sheet and raised it into a low ring of laurel leaves, working from the outer edge inward as Isaiah had instructed. He annealed the copper 6 times, each time stopping at a dull red visible beneath the charcoal light. The seam took silver solder without a gap. After tinning the interior, he set the mold on the black granite and touched each quarter with one finger. It did not wobble. Marcus carried it to Doris's cafe before sunrise. She filled it with lemon jelly, turned it onto a white plate, and stood back while the laurel pattern caught the window light. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The restored room had become spare rather than new. Copper molds hung against lime-plastered walls. The white pine floor carried dark tracks between the hearth, checking stone, and repair bench. Isaiah's hammers rested in their leather loops. The preserved pane from 1788 still bent the walnut trunks toward one another whenever Marcus looked north. The brass key remained on the mantel until a storm broke a limb from the older walnut tree. While cutting the branch into stove lengths, Marcus noticed a rectangular brass plate set deep in the trunk, nearly hidden beneath a fold of bark. Its green surface bore the craft mark. He brought the key outside. It entered the plate without resistance. A narrow compartment had been fitted inside the tree before the living wood closed around it. Marcus removed a cedar case wrapped in tarred cloth. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag and a note written by Ruth Bell on November 12, 1918, the day after the armistice ending the First World War. Nathaniel has come home breathing poorly but alive. She had written, "We placed this flag here because he could not bear to see it displayed as decoration. He said a flag should remind a household of those who did not return, not persuade the household to forget them." Ruth wrote that her brother had coughed through the night in France, repairing mess tins and copper kettles between attacks. Because metalwork steadied him, she asked whoever found the note to keep the flag folded until it could be held beside the name of another Bell lost to war. Marcus read the page beneath the walnut's bare branches. On December 16th, the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, he carried the folded flag and Elias Matthew Bell's Purple Heart to Baltimore National Cemetery. A groundskeeper helped him locate Elias's marker. Marcus set the metal case against the white stone and held the flag in both hands. There was no ceremony, only wind moving through winter grass and the distant turning of a maintenance cart. He stayed until the cold entered his shoes. Of the $28,610, Marcus spent only 4 coins from the cash. One bought the copper practice sheets. Another paid for the first load of lime. The third purchased replacement pulley wheels for the windows, and the fourth covered the recording fee on a preservation covenant preventing demolition without review. He earned the remaining repairs through catering shifts, mold work, and small debts repaid to Walter each Friday. The paper currency, silver, and untouched coins went back into the blue steel box. Marcus wrapped it in new oilcloth and returned it to the hollow stake with a short note of his own. For the next one, he sealed the cedar disc without solder, leaving the seam visible to anyone patient enough to clean it. The shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. Marcus pinned one index card to the corkboard inside Doris's cafe. Copper kitchen, molds repaired, dents raised, seams smoothed, interiors retined, payment by agreement. The first customer brought a pear-shaped mold that had belonged to her grandmother. The second mailed a cracked fish mold from Pennsylvania. By the following Christmas, Marcus kept a mailing list of 43 names in Isaiah's ledger press. He recorded every repair in the brown recipe book. Beside molds used for church suppers, food pantries, or free holiday meals, he wrote the same words Isaiah had used. No charge. Caleb returned in early spring carrying a board wrapped in an old bedsheet. He had grown broad across the shoulders, though the scar beneath his lip remained pale. He unwrapped a hand-carved walnut sign. The first line read, Bell and Hale Copper Mold Repair. Beneath it, in letters slightly smaller but cut more deeply, Caleb had carved, and daughters Marcus traced the final word with his thumb. I do not have daughters. Caleb leaned the sign against the bench. Not yet, maybe not yours. The boy's meaning settled slowly. Ruth Bell had worked there. Lenora had been intended to work there. Others might arrive carrying no family name connected to the room at all. Marcus hung the sign above the door. That summer, Lenora came to the lane once. She stood beneath the walnut trees in the gray-seamed apron she had worn at church suppers. Marcus watched her through the old glass. She did not knock, and he did not go outside. After several minutes, she placed the cross-spoon apron pin on the doorstep and walked away. Marcus left it there until evening. Then he picked it up, cleaned the hinge, and fastened it inside the recipe ledger, beside Isaiah's letter. He wrote the date beneath it, but no explanation. The ledger had room for facts. Forgiveness, if it came, would have to live somewhere else. In November, Marcus began a letter on heavy cream paper. He used Isaiah's exact opening. My dear one, whoever you are. He wrote that the room had been purchased for $8, though ownership had cost more than money. He described the chimney draw, the true sound of a steady mold on granite, and the danger of forcing copper after it had gone hard beneath the hammer. He wrote that no person should inherit a trade merely by blood. The work belonged to whoever approached it honestly, learned its limits, and understood that a repaired vessel was meant to return to a table. He did not sign the letter yet. There were still techniques to learn, errors to admit, and names to add. Some things are not abandoned. They are waiting for careful hands. On the final evening before Christmas, Marcus swept copper filings from the bench and banked the hearth coals. Outside, Caleb's sign moved slightly in the wind. Doris's last paper bag sat unopened beside the door, and the north window gathered the first flakes of snow. The copper jelly mold room waits. It has always waited. At the courthouse annex, Mrs. Evelyn Crow retired the following spring. When her replacement emptied window 4, he found an old dollar bill pressed flat beneath the drawer liner. Across its margin, in Mrs. Crow's small blue handwriting, were the words, "First payment, Marcus Hale, do not spend." He returned it to the drawer and closed it carefully. Script complete. Total approximately 39,900 characters. Cow. Tra Eloi, 7 Kich Ban Da Juan, Than, Dai Du Ofan Truok. Ket Thuktai, Part 6. The Epilogue. Huaitong, Dodai Koang, 39.900 Ki 2. Dongpam Vu Cow. Cow Tra Loi 8 Kich Ban Da Ket Thuk Dung Tai. Part 6. The Epilogue. Kong Kon Pan, Tiep Theo Trong Cow Truk Kua Tep. Viet Tiep Tiep Se Vot Koi Kich Ban Huan Chin, Va Fa Fan Ket Da Din. Cow Tra Loi, 9 Kich Ban Nai Da Huan Tat Toan Bo 6 Pan Va Ket Thuk Dung Theo Cow Truk Trong Tep. Kong Kon Pan Tiep Theo De Viet.